Thomas and Percy enjoy working in the docks. They like the sea air and the sound of the gulls. But one day, the friends were feeling hot and bothered. A crane was causing trouble. His name is Cranky, and this was his first day at the docks. "You're useless little bugs," he called from above. "If you put these freight cars on the inside lines, then I wouldn't have so far to travel." "Rubbish," said Thomas. "No crane has ever complained before." "Well, I'm complaining now." And Cranky banged his load down on the quayside. Later, the two engines met Gordon and James and told them about Cranky.
"Cranes are airy-fairy things. They need a lot of attention, like me, in fact," said Gordon.
"You should see the situation from Cranky's point of view," said James. "He's high up in the air, coping with wind, rain, and baking sun. Then he looks down and sees you two little engines being annoying. No wonder he calls you bugs." When Cranky heard that the big engines agreed with him, he grew bossier still. Come on, push those freight cars closer to me." But Percy was too upset to concentrate and pushed the freight cars too far. Poor Percy. Then Cranky played a trick on Thomas. "Push your freight cars onto the outside line. It's easier for me to load up." So Thomas did. But Cranky left the loads beside the freight cars, not in them. "You must have known my arm can't reach you there," complained Cranky. This mix-up caused confusion and delay. Sir Topham Hatt was most upset. "Thomas and Percy, this new crane has an important job to do. I have heard that you have not been helping him today. You will go to your sheds and consider how you will improve yourselves tomorrow." Now Thomas and Percy were upset too. That evening, a big storm raged across the island. Cranky and the engines were trapped at the docks. "We're sure to be safe in this shed," said Duck. But he was wrong. The engines had no idea they were about to be put in great danger by an old tramp steamer. It was out of control and running aground, straight into the sheds. Ah! "Help!" called the engines from inside the shed. "I can't!" called Cranky. When the storm was over, Sir Topham Hatt rushed to the scene of destruction. "Thomas and Percy will help you," he called to Cranky. "And then you can help the engines." "Oh, please hurry," cried Cranky, "and tell them I'm sorry I was rude to them." "So it was you," murmured Sir Topham Hatt. "I owe those engines an apology." Thomas and Percy soon came to the rescue. And it wasn't too long before Cranky was upright again and clearing the wreckage. At last, all the engines were free.
"Oh, thank you," said Gordon. "What would I have done without you?"
"Well, I had to be rescued before I could help you. But I never thought it would be by a couple of Cranky was about to say bugs, but he quickly corrected himself. Small engines, thank you. I'll never be rude again. However, you two mites are in my way, so move over." "Pa," said Percy, "he's back to bugging us." "Don't move! You're still attached to Cranky." But it was too late. Cranky still looks down on the two little engines. But ever since that stormy night, he never calls them bugs or mites, because he knows they might bite back. The little engines were busy clearing their railroad of leaves and broken branches. Peter, Sam, and Rusty often worked together. One day, Rusty helped Peter Sam to a water tower. Peter Sam felt much better after his long drink, but the freight cars were bored. "Let's break away." Their loads were heavy and the couplings old. One snapped. Faster, faster, shouted the freight cars. A sign read slow, steep bends and ravine ahead, but the silly cars never saw it. Then, it was too late. Peter Sam arrived at the scene of the disaster. His driver sighed. This was our fault. We didn't secure them properly. We'll have to get help to pull them out. Sir Topham Hatt will be very annoyed. And he was. You will work in the yards until I can trust you again. Duncan was delighted with Peter Sam's dilemma. Fancy not securing your freight cars on a hill. They'll come back to spook you and your special funnel. Woo! And who's to say you're not afraid of ghosts? Snapped Rusty. Ghosts? Things that go bump in the night? Rubbish! Well, I'll tell you a story that will make your funnel quiver, Rusty said. A long time ago, a little engine was returning home. It was a misty, moonlit night. Suddenly, the engine lost control and plunged over the side into the swamps below. He was never found again. But many a workman will tell you that when the moon is full, they have seen the little engine trying to get home. But he never reaches the other side. So what do you think of that, Duncan? Rubbish, replied Duncan. Never mind him, Peter Sam. He'd be frightened if he really saw a ghost. This gave Peter Sam's driver an idea. Let's play a trick on Duncan. The next day, he spoke to Duncan's driver and fireman, who agreed. We'll do it tonight. Duncan had to take coal cars to the slate mines and then bring cars back. Duncan's driver decided as part of the plan to cross the old iron bridge. Haunted bridge. Rubbish, snorted Duncan. It's as tame as a pet rabbit. But all the same, he kept thinking about Rusty's story. When dusk fell, he was keen to leave. If we don't go now, Scarloey will take my favorite place in the sheds. We have to collect our cars first, his driver replied. He could see their plan was working because Duncan was nervous. When night fell, they set off. The mists were rising around the old iron bridge. Duncan whistled, and the sound echoed everywhere. Then, ahead, he saw flickering lights. His driver knew they were only insects that shine brightly at night, but to Duncan they looked like an engine. Next, his driver secretly threw a rock from the cab into the ravine below. It's the ghost! Take me back! Take me back, please! When Duncan reached the safety of his shed, he closed his eyes tightly. Spooked, are you, Duncan? Laughed his driver. No, I'm asleep. And Duncan refused to open his eyes. He did, though, when he thought his driver wasn't looking, just to make sure that he was still there. It was a moonlit night. Henry was taking a goods train to the station by the lake. Whenever that owl hoots, a mist rolls in, murmured Edward. There's a legend that when the mist's about, there's a ghost about too. Take care on the old line, Henry. Stupid bird, said Henry. Owls, mists, ghosts. Edward's going soft at the boiler. There's no mist. But Henry was wrong. What's that? Cried Henry. It's an amber lamp, murmured his driver. That means proceed with caution. Who's there? No one replied. Henry crept slowly forward. He stopped by a tree. It had a sign nailed to it, "Beware of the viaduct." The driver was surprised. No one warned us about that before. And look, the signal's red. And the gates are closed. And there's a fogman's coat. But where is its owner? Then they saw a light move within the station building.
Ghosts!
Exclaimed Henry.
Edward was right.
Something very strange is happening, said his driver. I think it's best we go back.
So do I,
agreed Henry. By morning, the mist had cleared. A workman was talking about the unsafe viaduct. Lucky you didn't cross it last night. Yes, but we don't know who warned us, replied Henry's driver. Later that day, he spoke to Henry. The viaduct has been repaired. We can take our train back along the old line tonight. Henry really didn't want to. But when nightfall came, he was sizzling nicely. Suddenly, an owl hooted, and then Gordon thundered by. "Oh, look! Henry's spooked," said a freight car.
be quiet,
snapped Henry.
I'm not scared.
But he was. A little later, the fog came down. As they approached the same area, they saw the amber light again. "Here we go," said Henry's driver. Then, unknown to Henry, the gates mysteriously closed by themselves, and the signal went red. The freight cars had seen everything, and they were spooked. "Faster, faster! There's a ghost about!"
Stop, stop!
Yelled Henry. A mysterious figure watched Henry go by. Ahead was a landslide blocking the line. Henry braked hard, but the freight cars hit some of the rubble and plunged into the ravine. Just then, Henry's driver saw a strange sight coming towards them. "What's that?" he said. The fireman laughed. "That's our ghost. It's Old Bailey, the fogman." Old Bailey was very cross. "I tried to warn you about the viaduct. Why didn't you pay attention?" "We're sorry," replied the driver. "Is there anything we can do to thank you?" "I'd like to operate that old station. If you let me, I promise I won't spook Henry again." And in a little while, Old Bailey's wish was granted. "You and your station will be really useful," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Let's hear a hearty thank you to the friendliest, ghost on the island." Everyone cheered, especially Henry, who was the happiest of all. Next morning, as James was being repainted, Henry had an accident. "If you can't push cars properly, Henry, why not talk to a tree instead? You know how much you like the forest."
As a matter of fact, Bossy Boiler, Sir Topham Hatt is inspecting the island for trees that are too close to the line. He's worried they might cause trouble.
"Pah!" laughed James. "If I came upon a tree, I'd just push it aside."
"Really?"
Henry replied. But James was wrong. "You must go to the yards and collect an important goods train, James. It's heavy, so be careful," said Sir Topham Hatt. "But, sir, I've just been repainted. Can't Thomas or Percy do it? They're dirty and like working with freight cars." "Really useful engines don't argue." So James didn't. By the time he arrived at the yards, the weather had changed for the worse. "Your color's nice, James. Pity about your face, though," said a freight car. James ignored them and set off. Oliver and his brake van Toad liked working in the big yards, but one morning Toad noticed that Oliver was unhappy. He decided to find out why. Excuse me, Mr. Oliver. It seems to me that things are not well with you. If you forgive me for mentioning it." "You're quite right, Toad. All I do is shunt these freight cars onto the turntable. I long for a nice run. It's what an engine really needs. Quite so, Mr. Oliver. May I suggest that you speak to Sir Topham Hatt about your problems? But Oliver said nothing. He just grew unhappier, and he was rough with the freight cars. You're no good, Oliver. You're dangerous. We want Percy. Percy's far too busy to be bothered with the likes of you. And Oliver bumped the freight cars hard. You silly engine, shouted a workman. It'll take a long time to repair this turntable, which will cause confusion and delay. That night, Sir Topham Hatt arrived. Oliver, you have caused confusion. I thought you could control freight cars. You shall work the mail train for a while. Maybe the night air will clear your smoke box. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir, said Oliver sadly. Cheer up, old chap, said his driver. The mail train run is a grand run for a fine engine like you. Oliver smiled, but he still felt he had let everyone down. His driver took them along the coastal run with the mail train. The fresh air couldn't help but brighten Oliver's spirits. They made good speed until it was time to collect some important mail from Harold the helicopter.
Come on, Harold!
At last, Harold landed. Sorry I'm late, Great Western. Had a bit of a problem with one of my arms. Kept letting me down when I was meant to be up. You know how it is. We know that we'll be late for our first run, replied Oliver's driver. Soon they were on their way again. Ahead was a red signal light. Oliver didn't realize that the signalman had dozed off. Oliver whistled several times, but the signal stayed red. There must be something wrong with that signal. We'll go slowly and stop by the signal box, said his driver. But they never reached it. The points before the signal box were switched to an old track. They were going the wrong way. Oliver's fireman was concerned. We need to find a water tower soon. Instead, they saw an old station. Disaster lay ahead. Meanwhile, Sir Topham Hatt was worried. Oliver has not returned. We'll send out a search party. Soon he was high in the sky with Harold. There they are. It wasn't Oliver's fault, sighed the driver. I'm aware of that. I'm just glad to see you are all safe. Then he saw something. It was an empty old house beside the station. He went to inspect it. When he returned, he spoke to Oliver. You have found another attraction for our island. We'll make this house as good as new, and visitors can have tea and crumpets there. Sighed Oliver. Getting lost can be interesting, but being found is much nicer. Especially when it makes an engine feel really useful. On the island of Sodor, high up in the mountains was a mysterious boulder. It had stood alone for a long time, but one day workmen arrived to build a quarry on the land below. Rusty, the little diesel, met Thomas and Percy. Where's all this rock coming from? Percy asked. The new quarry, replied Rusty. This mountain rock is good for many things, although it's dangerous up there. Why? Asked Thomas. Because of a big boulder. I think it's watching me, said Rusty nervously. How can it be? Boulders don't have eyes. Well, Percy, there's something strange about this one. Just then, Edward arrived. He was delivering a new piece of machinery for the quarry. "What's that?" asked Rusty. "It's called Thumper. Apparently it helps collect the rock faster," replied Edward. Soon Thumper was working hard. The men were pleased, but no one bothered to check the boulder. When it rained, the workmen went away. Rusty gazed up and shivered. Above stood Boulder. Suddenly, a large slab of rock landed on the rails. Rusty was shocked. Driver was concerned. "We'd best leave till the weather's better. The rain loosened some of this rock." "I think it's Boulder wanting us to go away." The next day, the sun shone. Thumper was working harder than ever. Suddenly, Rusty noticed something. Boulder's moving. "Don't be so daft. It can't," said the driver. But it could. "It's rolling along our line." "We'll stop here until Boulder passes by," said the driver. But Boulder was nowhere to be seen. Then, oh no, it's behind us! Just ahead, they saw a small junction. One line went uphill. Boulder thundered past. Meanwhile, Skarloey was making his way up to the quarry. Then he saw Boulder. "Help!" Boulder was catching up fast. "We must warn the yards," shouted Skarloey. "Yes, but how?" called Rusty. Boulder rounded a bend, and there ahead was Rheneas. "It's running loose!" yelled Rheneas. His driver drove him back as fast as he could. "Hurry!" "Better a smash than a squash," sighed his driver. At the yards, Percy was collecting trucks. Then he heard Boulder. "Oh no, heading straight for me!" squeaked Percy. When Sir Topham Hatt inspected the damage, he decided to close the mine. Then he looked at Boulder. "We should have left this part of the island alone." They moved Boulder to a hill close by the yards. Rusty is sure that on a clear night it is gazing up at the mountain and that its sighs are being carried on the wind to where it once used to stand proud and silent. I wonder if Rusty is right. Don't you?